let me introduce myself. My name is Arina Distiatala. Now, I want to explain to you guys about the historical background of psycholinguistics. Okay, so at first, psycholinguistics is not an independent science that is studied specifically, but psycholinguistics is a science that is studied separately by both linguists and psychologists. Linguistics is the scientific study of language, and psychology is the scientific study of human behavior and cognition. Formed a new modern scientific discipline called psycholinguistics. Psycholinguistics is closely related to cognitive psychology, and research in the field relies heavily on experimental methods. People who study phenomena that result from the intersection of linguistics and psychology are called psycholinguists. Psycholinguistics, as an independent of language and human behavior, is still very new. How language and thoughts are related is an object of interest in many ancient cultures such as India, China, Greece, and Mesopotamia. In fact, psychology did not exist as a discipline in the first half of the 19th century. Next is the antecedent of modern psychology. The original description of Broca's and Wernicke's were crucial to the emergence of psycholinguistics as an independent discipline, but real progress came from the work of Wilhelm Wundt, who founded the first official research laboratory for psychological research at the University of Leipzig in Germany. The establishment of Wundt Laboratory in Leipzig is identified not only as the beginning of psychology as an independent discipline, but also as the beginning of the philosophical and empirical research conducted on language. The great new psycholinguistic and functional Karl Bucher, who emerged from the Wurzburg group and whose ideas were influenced by Gestalt psychologists, favored the use of introspective techniques. Arthur Blumenthal was one of the first to document the work of Wundt and other German psychologists in the field of psycholinguistics. Blumenthal claims that Leonard Bloomfield, G. H. Mead, F. de Saussure, and E. Boas were regular participants in Wundt lectures at the University of Leipzig, as well as so-called young grammarians or young grammatiker. Wundt's influence can be seen in his Introduction to the Study of Language. Okay, next is the beginning of the modern era in psycholinguistics. There were three critical moments in the history of language acquisition research that laid the foundation for the modern era. Two seminars sponsored by the Social Science Research Council and the subsequent publication of the original Osgood and Seebock, Psycholinguistics, a survey of theory and research problems. Three approaches to language behavior were identified: the linguistic approach, the learning theory approach based on behaviorism, which was strongly opposed by Chomsky, Fodor, and others, and the information theory approach, which is generally important to cognitive psychology. North Americans record the history of psycholinguistics from the 1950s, but most linguists would agree that psycholinguistics actually began in the mid to late in 1960s. John Aitchison claims that psychologists test their hypotheses primarily through carefully controlled experiments. Linguists, on the other hand, test their hypotheses primarily by examining them against spontaneous speech. Psycholinguistic research on children's language acquisition and learning in the 1960s and early 70s relied heavily on transformational generative model proposed by Noah Chomsky, a renowned American linguist and cognitive scientist. Chomsky is the eighth most cited source of all time and the most cited living author. The purpose of the research model is to find out how children acquire grammatical process in supporting the speech they hear. Modern psycholinguistics has turned to a new, functionally related and socially oriented model of language structure research because this previous work has shown controversy and ambiguity. Okay, thank you. That was my explanation about the historical background of psycholinguistics. So, thank you for your attention.